So there was a question. Let me first deal with. There's a couple of questions. Let me deal with them in some kind of order. My apologies if my writing looks worse than usual, just because, as I say, I can't get the driver for this tablet to work properly. So you had a question about leakages and injections. Well, first of all, GNP. So calculating GNP. I'll follow up on that. The second was a question about leakages versus injections. And we'll come back to that, but as a just briefly, right? If we're going to calculate GDP, we can calculate GDP by saying all income goes to consumption, savings, and taxes. It's the income approach. And all expenditure goes to consumption, investment spending, government spending, exports, and imports. Okay? You know what? Okay, that's fine. So the idea is, if we now equate these two, okay, we can write this equation as C plus S, and we'll talk more about this at some time. I'm just giving you a brief discussion. Plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay? We can cross off the C's here. Okay? And we can rearrange this as S plus T plus M is equal to I plus G plus X. Okay? And these are all considered exogenous variables. When we say exogenous, what we mean by that is that they are not influenced by the value of Y. Okay? We're going to assume that these are also well, not exogenous variables, but in terms of the, okay, S depends on Y, T depends on Y, and M depends on Y, okay, and we'll get to why they depend on Y, okay. So these can be exogenous or they can be endogenous. Again, we'll talk more about what that means, just a brief introduction here. But on this side here, this S, T, and M are what would be called the leakages. And on this side here, these would be the injections. Okay. These leakages could be endogenous, they could be exogenous. But in terms of the circular flow, if you think about where your income is earned by a household, then it consumes. When it consumes, consumption is expenditure directly. Okay, so consumption is direct expenditure, but savings goes out of the circular flow and then comes back in. Taxes goes out of the circular flow and then comes back in. Okay, so savings, when it goes out, comes back in through government spending. So it leaks out and then comes back in. Savings can go through government spending, or it can go through investments. Okay, taxes leaks out and then comes back in through government spending. Okay, savings can also become a net export issue, but same idea. Exports, right? That's an injection. Imports, that's spending going out of the economy. Okay, so that's dealing with that issue briefly. Again, we will talk more about it, but if it's still a problem at a later stage, raise the issue again. The other question was to do with growth, that question that we dealt with in chapter 21. Okay? So it said something along the lines of real GDP grows by 6% and then by 5.5%. Okay, real GDP grows 6% and then 5.5%. So I said if we want to calculate what the GDP is, and we had some number, and I can't remember what the number was, but let's say initial level was 100 or something like that. Initial GDP, and I think it was in 2005, equals 100. Initial GDP, and this is real GDP. Initial real GDP 2005, I don't remember the exact value, but let's call it 100. Okay? If 100 grows by 6%, what I said then is the new value of GDP, in other words, 6%, was it? Anyway, I can't remember if it was 2005. But if it grows in the first year by 6%, then real GDP in 2006, okay, with 6% growth, if it's 6% growth, then I know that that's 0.06. Real GDP in 2006 with 6% growth will be equal to the initial amount, so it's 100, plus 100 growing at 6%. Okay? Which is the same as saying 100 times 1 plus 0.06, which is equal to 100 times 1.06. So the question I got asked was, why is it 1.06 and not 0.06? Okay? Is everyone happy with why it's 1.06? Because I got to take the initial 100 plus 100 growing at 6% is 1 plus 0.06, so 100 times 1.06, right? Okay, then the same happens when the prices increase by 18%. I must times whatever the real value is by the change in prices. So times 1.18, 1 plus 18%. The initial value plus the growth value. Why does it look like that? Well, remember that if we're talking about growth as a percentage, how do we calculate that? We're talking about, I don't know, grade 10 maths or something. Growth is a percentage, new minus old divided by old. Does that formula ring a bell? A growth rate, it's the new value minus the old value divided by the old value, right? So we can rearrange this. Growth as a percentage times the old value must equal the new value minus the old value. Okay? Now we can reorganize again. Growth as a percentage times the old rate plus the old, sorry, not value, rate, value. So growth as a percentage times the old value plus the old value must equal the new value. In other words, the old value times 1 plus growth as a percentage equals the new value. Right? Okay? So when we did that question about growth rates, there's no fancy weird ass economics happening there. That's just grade 10 maths. Okay? Any other questions regarding that calculation? No? Is everyone happy? Okay, I hope so. So I will get back to you on this one. I then moved on from chapter 21 onto chapter 22, and we're talking about, first of all, jobs and unemployment, and then what we're going to talk about is inflation. We haven't got to the inflation part yet. We're still talking about jobs. We went through a plan for how this chapter is going to unfold. First discussion, unemployment. We spoke about why unemployment is bad, and we looked at a breakdown of how we classify different components within our working population, or within the population in general, but what we're interested in is the working components of the population. We looked at a bunch of different ratios, and we eventually got to the equations. What's of interest? The unemployment rate, absorption rate, labor force participation rate. I then left you with this question. Did anyone manage to complete this question? If not, let's take 2 minutes quickly and let's work through this question. Well, first you work through it with the people around you, and then I'll work through it with you, okay? Okay. So let's talk through this quickly. First of all, are you happy with an answer of 35%? Some people are, some people are not. If you are not, please do raise your hand. Give me an indication of, yeah? An indication, sorry, of what you would like help with. Where are you stuck? Where can we... I could absolutely. It's definitely interesting from my perspective to know where you're getting stuck though. So we could start. Maybe you can give me some help here. Yeah. Yeah. So these are our discouraged workers. Okay, so yeah, not economically active. It's a good distinction to make. Not economically active does not mean everyone is discouraged. Okay, not economically active just is broken up into two separate categories. So not available to work means people that they're not economically active because they don't want to work. They've got absolutely no interest in working, right? You could be, you've made so much money when you were young that now you're just like, whatever, I'm going to go and, I don't know, travel Greece or something, right? Or maybe you're a trust fund baby and you're just like, you guys, right? You know? That's different to then a discouraged worker who's someone who's not looking for a job, but if they had a job, they would want it, right? They want to work. So are you happy that this question mark number here, what would the value of that be? Everyone happy with that? Okay, 1,100 plus 1,900 is going to give us our total of 3,000. Okay? Any idea what this number here is, or what this number here is, or what this number here is? No? Was that a yes? Did you? Okay. 800 and? 855. And how did we get 855? Okay, so let's just step through those. You went very quickly, right? So, first of all, you said there's a working age population of 7,500. And you said, well, hang on a minute. If the working age population is 7,500 and my not economically active is 3,000, it means my labor force must be 4,500. Okay? Then you know that the unemployment rate is 19%, and the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. Okay? So therefore, the unemployed must be 19% times 4,500, which gives me 855, right? So you were just working at like, you know, astro speed there, and cool. Difficult to keep up. Okay, so we got 855, we're happy with that. So now if we want to get the broad unemployment rate, how do we get the broad unemployment rates? We're going to take the number of unemployed and add the number of discouraged, and we're going to divide it by the labor force plus the number of discouraged. Yeah? Okay. And if we do that, we should get a number that's 0.35 unless I've done something wrong, which is frequent. So 0.35, is that correct? Is that right? Cool. Okay, any questions here? No? Can I get an indication? Will you raise your hand if you are happy with the way this question is, that you understand what's going on? Raise your hand if you like, yes, I'm comfortable with that calculation. Yeah, just put it up. Oh, come on. Okay, that's not a lot of hands. So put your hands up if you are not comfortable with this question. Hands up if you're not comfortable. Okay, how did we get 855? We know that the unemployment rate is 19%. The strict or narrow unemployment rate is 19%. How do we calculate 19%? The number of unemployed divided by the labor force. Okay? How do we know the size of the labor force? We know that the working age population is 7,500, and we know that those that are not economically active are 3,000. Okay? Therefore, the labor force must be 4,500. 3,000 plus 4,500 must equal 7,500. Then 19% of this equals the number of unemployed. It's 855. Okay, take a look at it when you go home. Come and see me tomorrow if you're still not happy. So we mentioned the fact that you can be unemployed, and that our primary measure of unemployment is the narrow unemployment rate. We just call it the unemployment rate. So when we talk about unemployment rate, what we mean is narrow unemployment rate or strict unemployment rate. All of those mean the same thing. So, although that is the official unemployment rate, there are two other kinds of unemployment rates that we've already discussed. First of all, if we consider something called marginally attached workers, another name for marginally attached workers is discouraged workers. Okay? So we've seen how the unemployment rate changes when we include people that are discouraged, right? They're also referred to as marginally attached. So a person who currently is neither working nor looking for work, but has indicated that he or she wants and is available for a job and has looked for work at some point, is called a marginally attached worker. Okay? So someone that's not looking for a job but would be happy to do a job if a job was made available. Okay? Discouraged. We also have to think about how we treat part-time workers. Many part-time workers only want part-time work. Fair enough. However, there are some part-time workers that want full-time jobs but cannot find them. Okay? If you have a part-time job, you are nevertheless considered employed, despite the fact that you might want to work more or longer hours and can't. There's no way of capturing that in our measure of unemployment. So these are the ways in which our measures, if you want to think about what they're measuring, you can also think about what they're not measuring. Okay? These are some of the things that we are not measuring when we measure unemployment. We're going to talk about what kind of unemployment is the worst or the most costly. Obviously, all unemployment is costly, but the most costly is going to be long-term. And why is long-term particularly problematic? Well, not only do you have losses of income as well as any other kind of costs that are involved in searching, but when you have long-term, you also have a decrease in human capital. In other words, the value of your human capital decreases the longer you are unemployed. That is why long-term is particularly problematic. So then let's think about unemployment and how we become unemployed and what kind of unemployment we're in. And we can distinguish three different types. The first that we distinguish is something called frictional unemployment. Okay, so our first one is frictional. What is frictional unemployment? It's the unemployment that arises from the normal labor turnover. There's an unending flow of people into and out of the labor force, and there's also an unending process of job creation and job destruction. What does that mean? Say your company goes out of business, you are now unemployed. Okay? You can still apply for a job, and assuming you are in a job that, in a company, in an industry that is still an industry that's in demand, you could get another job. In other words, just because your company goes under doesn't mean you can't be employed. So if you lose your job, but you can quickly be re-employed, or if you quit your job and go looking for another job knowing that there's a good chance you're going to get employed relatively quickly, then you are frictionally unemployed. And we'll contrast that in a moment to something called structural unemployment. Another way you might want to think of frictional unemployment is what I've heard termed fun employment. Okay? Fun employment, you know? So you're unemployed at the moment, but, you know, you'll be employed relatively soon. You just got to get a job, right? And maybe you're taking your time looking for a job because you're enjoying, I don't know, the other finer things in life in the meantime. Because, you know, 8 to 5 gets pretty tiring. Okay? So frictional unemployment. Contrast that to structural unemployment. What is structural unemployment? That is the unemployment that arises when changes in technology or international competition change the skills that are needed to perform jobs or change the location of jobs. Okay? In other words, if you are in a company and your company goes under because no one wants the products that your company sells, and you are specialized in making those products, when you lose your job, no one is going to want to employ you anyway because your skills are in producing something that no one wants. Right? You with me? You have a problem. You can't just quickly go and get another job. You will have to go back to school, go and get training in something else, get skills in something different that the marketplace wants in order to be rehired. You are then structurally unemployed. In other words, given your current skill sets, you're not going to be employed. Or you are living, for example, in Detroit in the US, and you're involved in car manufacturing. If you know anything about Detroit in the US, it's not really where you want to go and invest in retail property. I mean, sorry, not retail, in residential property, because the population has halved in like the last 10 years, because it used to do US auto manufacture, and US auto manufacture has collapsed pretty much, right? Or if it hasn't collapsed, it has gone almost entirely automated. Okay? So if you were someone on the assembly line of GM, you probably no longer, there's not much demand for your skills if you live in Detroit. So if you want to carry on working in auto manufacture, you're going to have to at least leave Detroit to get a job, right? You are structurally unemployed in the sense that you cannot get a job where you are. You have to make some kind of drastic change in order to get employed, like you've got to move somewhere else, to a different city, to a different country, okay? Or you have to upskill yourself in a totally different skill set. And both frictional and structural unemployment are different to cyclical unemployment. What do we mean by cyclical unemployment? If you recall, in last week's lectures, we plotted GDP against time, and we said that what GDP tends to do over time is kind of go up and then down and look something like this. But we can draw a trend line through this, and we see that over time GDP tends to go up, and sometimes it goes up very, very quickly and reaches what we call a peak, and then we turn into a recession and GDP starts falling, we reach a trough, GDP starts increasing, and we go through a period called expansion. Okay? When we talk about cyclical unemployment, what we mean is as our economy expands, we start employing more and more people. As we start entering into recession, we start employing less and less people. Okay? If we consider this trend line, this sort of average line here, at all points along this average line, we talk about full employment. What we mean by full employment is that there is only structural unemployment and frictional unemployment. There is no cyclical unemployment. So what is cyclical unemployment? Cyclical unemployment is the unemployment that arises when we move away from this trend line. Okay? So in other words, if we go below this trend line, we start entering into cyclical unemployment territory. What that means is you don't have a job not because you don't have the skills that are required, or you don't have a job not because no one wants your skills. The reason you don't have a job is just that the economy is not doing particularly well and firms are not hiring at the moment. As soon as the economy starts picking up, people are happy to hire you. Great. Then you are cyclically unemployed. You with me? Another type of unemployment which doesn't fit across, when I say it doesn't fit across, it doesn't fit into cyclical unemployment, structural or frictional, and really sits across all of them, is the idea that the youth, right, of an economy are particularly vulnerable to unemployment. And what we've seen in the last decade is an overall increase in youth unemployment across most economies in the world. So if we want to talk about problems with unemployment and problematic unemployment and a growing trend in unemployment, it's unemployment of young people. You had a question over there? No? Break. Okay, cool. All right, yeah, we leave it there and then we'll come back.